Hi friends, I welcome you all to Scholar. This is Akshya and I take your medieval history course here. Today we are at the 15th lesson and we are starting with the Tughlaq dynasty. And this is an important dynasty from the Sultanate and the Indian history perspective and also the UPSC exam perspective. But before we talk about the Tughlaqs in great detail, let's take a quick look at what we've covered so far. Yes, so in the last lesson we had started off with the Khiljis and we had finished Khiljis actually. And for the whole Delhi Sultanate, if you were to talk about, we have covered slaves and the Mamluk dynasty or the Mamluk dynasty, and there were three Kutubi, Ilbari 1 and Ilbari 2, and then there was your these were the three slave dynasty, and then there was your Khilji dynasty, right? And we studied essentially in the last lesson, we talked about Jalaluddin Khilji, who was the founder, and then we spoke about Alauddin Khilji, who was the most important ruler of the Khiljis and the Sultanate. And then we spoke about the Alauddin Khilji's reforms that he had brought in the military, in the market reforms, and also the other reforms as in the policy towards the nobles and the land revenue administration policy also, right? So that is essentially what we studied in the last lesson. And we'd also learned then after Alauddin Khilji, nearly just 4 years, Khiljis had come to an end, and there was a person named Ghazi Malik, one of the governors of the Khiljis, who took up the title of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, and he took up to the throne. That is essentially what we had covered in the last lesson. Now we were to start with the Tughlaqs, right? So that is essentially what we are going to be doing in the lecture today. Great. So yes, so let's start with the Tughlaq dynasty. So Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, there are three important rulers that we have here, and you can see the reign duration. It is from 1320 to 1414, right? Around 100 years you can see. And there are three important rulers: Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Great. Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and Firoz Shah Tughlaq. And you can see the longest reign that we have here is of Firoz Shah, and even Muhammad bin is quite an important one. So we're going to talk about each one of them one by one, right? And this is the spread or the extent of the Tughlaqs. You can see that there is some dent in between, the Sultanate compared to what you had during the times of Khiljis, especially during the times of Alauddin Khilji. We had understood essentially that almost until the the bottommost tip of the South India, until Rameshwaram, we learned that Malik Kafur had built a temple, right? So that was the extent, but still we're going to talk about the Tughlaq dynasty now one by one, starting with the Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. So anyway, so Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq is the founder. We already learned in the last lesson that Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq was the one who founded the Tughlaq dynasty, and he was the first sultan to take the title of Ghazi. I had spoken this thing, right? Ghazi Malik. So he was the first title to take the sultan to take the title of Ghazi, right? And he sent his son Jona Khan. Jona Khan was basically, okay, before we move to that, understand what is Ghazi. Ghazi means the slayer of infidels. Infidels, or basically a non-believer Islam, right? So that is Ghazi. So he was on this religious mission also, you should understand, right? And he had sent his son Jona Khan, who was actually Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So he had sent his son to reassert his authority in Warangal and Madurai. These were these two places where there was rebellion and they were challenging the authority of Sultan. So he had sent his son Jona Khan or Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Also he had brought Odisha and Bengal under control, and another important contributions could be that he had founded Tughlaqabad, which is another city near Delhi, and he built the Tughlaqabad fort. You can see the picture right here. This is of Tughlaqabad fort. Also, he is the first sultan who ever started the irrigation works, right? So things you should remember: who was the founder of Tughlaq? Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, first sultan to take the title and father of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and he had founded Tughlaqabad and first sultan to start irrigation works. Great. Now, so essentially that was about Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. Now we'll talk about Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, as I've repeated many number of times, is an important character. He had a reign of almost 26 years, and the problem with Muhammad bin Tughlaq is that though he was very ambitious and he he was a very intelligent man, but he's termed as an ill-fated idealist. What does this term mean? All of these terms are similar. Ill-fated idealist, wisest fool, Pagal Pasha, like a mad king. This essentially means mad king in Urdu or in Persian, you can say. Yeah, or in Hindi. That is essentially what are the terms used for Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Now, why are these kind of terms used for Muhammad bin Tughlaq? Because he had really great ambitious schemes, but they would all turn up in miserable failures. You know, the schemes were great and all that, but they would always end up in failures. And why was he so intelligent? Because he was the only Delhi Sultan who had a comprehensive literary, religious and philosophical education, right? And he was very tolerant in religious matters, and he was not, you could say, he was not very Islam driven, and he was not very strict when it came to following the Islamic code, right? And he maintained diplomatic relations with far off countries like Egypt, China, Iran, etc. And this is Ibn Battuta. This is Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta had essentially visited during the reign of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. And Ibn Battuta famous work, you can remember, Rihla. Who has written Rihla? If they ask you, you should remember Ibn Battuta has written Rihla. Okay. Now, other things about other contributions of Muhammad bin Tughlaq is he set up a department of agriculture. Now you can see that this is a sultan who's really wanting to take care of the needs of his people, and he understands that agriculture is really important for the prosperity of the people. So he is setting up a new department altogether, which is about the agriculture. The department is called as Diwan-e Kohi or Diwan-e Amir Kohi. Okay. And this department would look after how the agriculture is going and etc. Any problems which are faced by the peasants. And he launched a scheme by which loans for cultivation were given to the farmers. You know, the way present day governments, they give loans to the peasants, and then peasants can buy their inputs, seeds, etc., fertilizers. Similarly, those days Muhammad bin Tughlaq used to give Takawi loans for agriculture to the farmers, and he had even set up a model farm, a huge model farm under the state. And this was an experiment which was continued by Firoz Shah, his successor also, this model farm thing. And we'll study these things in great detail later, but remember that he did some great work for agriculture, right? Other contributions, he built the fort of Adilabad, and he built the city of Jahanpana, right? So we had essentially studied that there was a city called Siri, which was set up during the times of Alauddin Khilji, and who had set up the city of Jahanpana? Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Okay, so these things you should remember. And he has built the fort of Adilabad. And by the time towards his last days, the whole of South India, you remember I had shown that map in which there was this big dent in the middle, somewhere Deccan and South. So this dent, basically by the time of his last days of his reign, South India became almost independent, and Vijayanagar kingdom, Bahmani kingdom and Madurai Sultanate had essentially emerged. Okay, so this is about Muhammad bin Tughlaq, not a very strong ruler. The most remarkable feature of his reign are his experiments, which we are going to study one by one. But even more remarkable is how all those mighty experiments came a cropper, how all of them failed. And this is why because he was putting in a lot of money into those experiments. So essentially there were rebellions going on, and a lot of independent states emerged during the last days of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Great. So now we're going to talk about, as you can see, we're going to talk about essentially the 5 experiments. You see this little slider that I've put here, Muhammad's 5 experiments, right? So his 5 experiments have been talked about, and we're going to talk about them one by one. Barani has also, Ziauddin Barani has also mentioned these 5 experiments, and we're going to take them up one by one. So the first experiment is transfer of the capital from Delhi to Devgiri. Devgiri is Daulatabad, the new name for it was renamed as Daulatabad essentially, and originally the capital was at Delhi. Initially it was at Lahore, then Delhi, and then Muhammad thought that, because the empire was until the South India, by the time of Khiljis it was until South India, and so he thought that because now you see, if this is let's say this is your South India and Delhi is somewhere here, so he thought that if I have a capital somewhere here, it'll be easier for me to control the entire South India, etc. as well, right? I'm sorry, I'm not able to draw it very well, some issue with my stylus today, but anyway, so let's understand this. If this is your, wait, I'll redraw. So if this is, let's say, India, and we have Delhi somewhere here, okay, so he thought that if I have a city, if a capital here, then it will be easier for me to control South India also and North India, somewhere like the center, because Delhi is too far from the south, right? So he thought if I move my capital to Devgiri, Delhi is there and let's say Devgiri is here. So he thought, let's move my capital to Devgiri, and I can have a better control, basically to have better administration in the south, right? But what happened? This experiment backfired, and Delhi to Devgiri, the distance was almost around 1500 kilometers. Now that huge distance to be covered, and that to moving the entire capital, so you need to move all the officials or the royal household and army and everything. So he was moving the people and all his officials and royal household, court, everything. So that kind of a movement for that longer distance, that too in those days when there were no such really modern means of transport and travel, etc. So it was a really difficult thing to have been done on those days. What happened was that in an attempt to do that, there were huge losses. A lot of people died on the way, and there was a lot of money that was put into this experiment. So essentially the experiment did not really work, and he lost that money, he lost those men, and finally, he shifted the capital back to Delhi. After 2 years, he spent some 2 years in Devgiri as his capital, and then he moved back to Delhi because there was a lack of water supply there. Now you can imagine, right, that shifting a capital, first thing is that shifting in itself is very cumbersome. Then taking up all the losses, you moved, and then you're moving back. So there was a complete failure, and there was a lot of big losses for the money, treasury. The royal treasury was also emptied for this experiment, right? So this is the experiment number 1. Second experiment that we're going to talk about here is the plan to occupy Khorasan and Iraq. Now Khorasan and Iraq, what is that? This is essentially the Persian Empire, right? So he wanted to extend the empire towards the west of India, right? So it was already until Peshawar and Afghanistan parts. Now he wanted to go even further. So let's say, if we have to understand it in a map, let's say if this is your, let's say, I'm really sorry about the maps today. Okay, I'll try to redraw it. Let's say if this is how you have, just for your understanding sake. So he wanted to extend it even further, like this side. So the empire was here, around here we had Khorasan and Iraq. So Muhammad wanted to wanted to occupy that area, and he organized a huge army for that purpose. And why did he make such a plan? Because the conditions in Iraq were not good, and there was no stable empire at that time. But what happened was that as he was planning for this you can say experiment or this expedition, the conditions improved in Iraq, and there was the political stability, and then he had to abandon the plan because he understood that now he can't go ahead with this plan, and he can't occupy the plan the Iraq Khorasan area anymore. So he disbanded the army, and because he had recruited all those people and he had maintained that huge an army, he had to rather pay them extra for one full year, while he was preparing and everything. So he had to pay all those people, his soldiers basically. And again, there were a lot of losses that he had to incur, and again the royal treasury was empty, right? So this was the second experiment. First, the shifting of capital. Second is plan to occupy Khorasan and Iraq. Third is token currency. Again, really infamous. So, around the time of Muhammad bin Tughlaq in India, in China, Kublai Khan had come up with this experiment of token currency. So, Muhammad also thought of implementing it in India, and at par with the silver tankas, which is the coins of those days, Muhammad came up with the copper coins. And what happened was that those copper coins were not exchanged by all the people, right? And these copper coins were easy to forge, easy to replicate, and therefore there were a lot of heavy losses which were made to the exchequer, because if everybody starts making their own money lost its value. In economy, you will understand, or you might have already done this, that how does money lose its value? If too much money is chasing too few goods, then the money loses its value. So everybody is printing copper coins in their own homes because it's easier to forge and it's not as expensive as silver tanka, but the value is considered in the market, the value is considered at par with the silver tanka. So essentially, tokens or the copper coins lost their value, but because Sultan had promised, he had to, I would say, exchange them for the silver tankas, and then he lost a lot of money, and again the treasury was empty to exchange those coins. And there's even a statement which we're going to see later, wherein Barani has said that there laid a heap of copper coins on the roads in the kingdom, right? On the road. So many people had discarded it, has lost so much value that there was a whole heap of coins lying on the road in the kingdom. Okay, so again, this is the third failure that Muhammad had to face. Fourth is his expedition to Karachil or the Kumaon Hills. So again, he wanted the same way like it happened for Iraq and Khorasan. Karachil expedition also several setbacks, and this was also a failure. Now, fifth is his agricultural reforms. Now, we've already spoken about the agricultural reforms, but again, because that's how Barani has summed it up, his 5 big experiments and failure. So essentially, what we had already studied, I'll just repeat: agricultural reforms, Takawi loans for cultivation, separate department, Diwan-e-Kohi, and a model farm under the state. And on this model farm, he spent around 70 lakh tankas, right? So essentially, tanka was 1 unit, 70 lakh, and that too, imagine 700 years ago from today. So you can't even imagine the amount of money that was in those days. But essentially, Sultan had to spend so much money, but the results were not as encouraging. However, this was one experiment which you cannot call as a complete failure, because even Firoz Shah is going to continue it. But again, the sort of outputs or the results, we can say, that Muhammad had expected, those did not really come about. Next is the taxation in Doab. So essentially, you see, I'll just quickly tell you once more. Out of these 6, the 5 failures are everything except agricultural reforms. So agricultural reforms were not really a failure, as I have said earlier. Not as per his expectation, but not a failure. So the 5 failures are going to be those 4 and the taxation in Doab. So what is the taxation in Doab? Now see, when all of these massive debacles had happened, his failed reforms, his failed token currency experiment, his failed capital transfer, his failed planning to occupy Khorasan, Iraq, all these failures, obviously there was a lot of loss of money. So after Sultan lost so much money, now he wants the money because the exchequer is all empty. So what he does is that he increases the taxation. He increases the taxation in the Ganga, Yamuna, Doab. We understand, right? Land between 2 rivers. So he increases the taxation in the Ganga Yamuna Doab region, and it was arbitrary, right? There was no reason, nothing, and it was too huge compared to the normal taxes that they were paying. So it was arbitrary and it was excessive, and farmers, they were given a jolt all of a sudden. So this, and on top of it, it was ill-timed, because at that time when this increase in the taxation occurred, there was already a famine that had occurred, and then there was a plague, right? So people were going through tough times already, and plus this arbitrary taxation. So that was, like the last straw, and the peasants, they lost their patience and they revolted, and then he had to employ the army to crush the revolts, etc. So again, a failed experiment, came a cropper, people are revolting against him. So you can see again an experiment which has caused a lot of loss of his goodwill and of course money, right? So those are the 5 failures. Which are the 5 failures? Taxation in Doab, Karachil expedition to the Kumaon Hills, token currency, right? Plan to occupy Khorasan and Iraq, transfer of capital from Delhi to Devgiri. Great. So we've understood all of these failed experiments one by one. Now what happens is, when he has had so many failures and he's lost so much money, essentially what happens is that the Sultanate starts breaking up, or you can say it starts weakening. Now when the Sultan becomes weak, this is something that I've spoken of again and again. When the central power becomes weak, what happens is that the feudal chiefs, or the sub level of the central authority, they start asserting themselves, or they start becoming more powerful. That is essentially what happened. And all of these, you can see these, other than the green portion that you have, except this, these people, they started asserting themselves. Multan, Sindh, Gujarat, Bahmani came up, Gondwana states. So you can see Awadh, there were all these governors who revolted, and there was a rebellion in Gujarat, and then there was a Bahmani kingdom which came up, I've said. Then there was Vijayanagar kingdom which came up, and we're going to talk about these kingdoms in the coming lectures. But this is what happened. The result or the fallout of Muhammad's failed experiments were the weakening of the Delhi Sultanate, and a lot of rebellions and shrinking of the Sultanate, because a lot of rebellions happened at different places, and all of those feudal chiefs, they started becoming independent one by one. 1 or 2 names you can remember, not necessarily all of them. Vijayanagar, Bahmani and Madurai, extremely important. All of these failed experiments, Sultanate is not doing well. Ultimately, it took a toll on his health, and by 1351, Sultan died. Okay, so Sultan dies in 1351, and it's been summed up in a very you can say ironical line by Badayuni, who's a historian, and he says the Sultan was freed from his people and the people were freed from the Sultan, right? So what does the line mean? That the people were no good to Sultan and Sultan was no good to people. Essentially, they were no match, is what you can understand here. And because his experiments were not giving the deserving to the people, and people, the things that people were expecting, they were not what Sultan was able to give. So this is why Badayuni sums it up in such an ironical way, you can say. The Sultan was freed from the people and the people were freed from the Sultan. So this is a famous line, you can remember this. And this is the line that I was mentioning: heaps of copper coins lay on the roadside in Tughlakabad. Again, Barani has called him a mixture of opposites, and his reign marked the beginning of the process of its decline. So this is about, why does it mark the beginning of the process? Sometimes in mains it could be asked. Muhammad bin Tughlaq's reign marks the beginning of the process of its decline. So you're going to talk about how his reign, there were these experiments and how they were big failures and how they dented the strength of Delhi Sultanate. That's what you need to write in questions like that. Now we shall talk about the next ruler, which is Firoz Shah Tughlaq. So Firoz Shah Tughlaq who was Firoz Shah Tughlaq? He was the son of the younger brother of the founder, that is Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. And he has a unique distinction that he was chosen as the Sultan by the nobles. So he had not ascended the throne by killing somebody or murdering, or he was rather chosen by the nobles. So that was his unique distinction. And also he appointed Khan-e-Jahan Maqbal. Who is this person? Khan-e-Jahan Maqbal is basically a Telugu Brahmin who had converted to Islam, and he made this person the Wazir. Khan-e-Jahan Maqbal is the Telugu Brahmin convert. He was made the Wazir by Firoz Shah, and Firoz Shah had great regard for Caliph, and he styled himself as the deputy. Now, why this thing? He does that because I told you initially also that whenever the Sultanate starts declining or weakening, the ruler will seek for external validation. So this is like an external validation factor, something like legitimizing his rule by calling himself as the deputy of Caliph, because Caliph was considered very respected and very pious in the whole Islamic world. So this is why he calls himself the deputy of Caliph. And after his accession to the throne, he faced the problem of preventing the disintegration. Essentially what I just spoke of, that there was a problem of disintegration already happening by the time Firoz Shah had acceded to the throne. Okay. Now, because of all these issues, he had to follow the ulema's advice and he ruled according to the Islamic law. Why such a step? Because it will be easier for him to please the nobles and ulemas and all his advisors, and because he was already facing the problem of disintegration, so he was following the ulema's advice, and he established Sharia across his realm, and he would please the nobles. How would he please them? He would want to keep them happy. How? By making their succession hereditary. Their son would become the next noble in line, etc. Right? And the properties would also be inherited by their sons. Also, the Iqta system was made hereditary, right? Iqta system was also made hereditary, and also to please the nobles, etc., he was being intolerant towards non-Sunni Muslims, that is, towards the Shias and Sufis, and he would treat the Hindus really badly, like some second-class citizens, right? All these steps you can link them because he wanted to keep the nobles, ulemas happy, so he was doing all these things. And he developed a lot of slaves. I mean, in the sense, he increased the number of slaves to, I think, around almost 1.5 lakhs somewhere. And he set up these royal factories called karkhanas. Karkhanas, what would they do? That they would essentially manufacture the articles to be used by the royal household and the nobles, etc. Okay, so he had set up the factories, and thousands of slaves were employed in these factories, right? So remember, royal karkhanas and number of slaves, almost around 1.5 lakhs. And because there was so many great number of slaves, therefore a separate department called as Diwan-e-Bandigan was set up. Bandigan you can remember from the word bandi, right? So Bandigan is essentially department for slaves that was set up. And then there was a new department, again another new department called as Diwan-e-Khairat, which was essentially set up to take care of the charity work. Diwan-e-Khairat, charity. Khairat, you understand, right? Giving something in Khairat, they sometimes say, that is Khairat, charity department, to take care of the orphans and widows. All these steps, all of these steps, Khairat, and then he also set up free hospitals like Darul Shafa, they were called as Darul Shafa, and marriage bureaus for poor Muslims, for their marriages, etc. That was also done. All these steps, I was saying, all these steps have been taken in line with what Islam says, or the Quranic you can say principles suggest or prescribe. They consider them good to be done by a sultan. This is why he was doing all these things. And he also built a number of canals, and he set up a separate department for public works. So he set up a department for slaves, a department for charity, and a department for public works. And also there were very many fruit gardens around his time, around 1200 almost, and that was also a source of revenue for the kingdom. So next we talk about the taxation. Now taxation, as everything was as per the Islamic law, so were the taxes. And he imposed jizya, because jizya was a tax that was essentially imposed on the non-Muslims. We know that, right? So the non-Muslims had to pay jizya, and this is something that was, please, I'm really sorry about my handwriting. Anyway, so he imposed jizya on the non-Muslims because, this was again something which was prescribed by the Islamic law. He was the first sultan to also impose the irrigation tax, and he abolished some 28 taxes as they were against the Islamic law. So whatever is against the Islamic law, he will not do it. Whatever Islamic law says a sultan should do, he would do it, right? And he collected some 4 important taxes. Which were those 4 important taxes? It was kharaj, khams, jizya and zakat. Zakat was on the Muslims. Muslims should give for charity, and jizya is non-Muslims should give because they are not Muslims. Khams is some share from the war booty, and kharaj is from the agriculture produce. So these 4 taxes here that we have written here, essentially, here, these were the 4 important taxes under Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Now, his military campaigns are not important. Just remember that he focused on the North India because anyway Deccan and South had slipped out of his hand, and he wanted to consolidate whatever he had instead of increasing the kingdom, right? So he did try in Bengal, but ultimately they were unsuccessful campaigns and Bengal became free. Similarly, Odisha he tried, but he was able to be successful there, and he got some booty from Odisha. Nagarkot also, you can remember, Jwalamukhi temple is where he got some 13,000 Sanskrit manuscripts from, and then he translated them to Persian. So his expeditions are not important. Just remember that during Firoz Shah Tughlaq, not many expeditions or conquests were happening. Sultanate was anyway declining, so he just focused on North India. Okay. Yeah, now coming to the art and culture part of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. So what was his contribution to the art and culture? He had set up some 300 new towns. One is Firozabad, which is now called Firoz Shah Kotla. I'm sure all of us have heard it. Firoz Shah Kotla Stadium we have heard of, right? That Firoz Shah Kotla. And Jaunpur he had established. Hisar, the city in Haryana, he had established. So these are all cities or towns which were established or built during Firoz Shah Tughlaq's reign. Then he repaired some old monuments like Qutub Minar and Jama Masjid. And then there was an important scholar at his court, Barani, Ziauddin Barani. We've been doing this since Khilji's reign, right? So that was also, he was actually at the court of Firoz Shah. And there was one more fellow whose name I have written here, Afif. So Afif and Barani together had written Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi. Okay, and there's one more book which Barani had written, Futwa-e-Jahandari. You can remember these names, please. And what was the name of Firoz Shah's autobiography that he had himself written? Futuhat-e-Firoz Shahi. This is an important work, please remember. Futuhat-e-Firoz Shahi, autobiography written by Firoz Shah. You can understand Firoz Shahi is about Firoz Shah. Just remember, Futuhat is autobiography, Tarikh is biography written by Barani. Don't confuse these two. Now finally, Firoz Shah died in 1388, and after he died, as happens always in case of a stable rule, there was a power struggle, and also there was another problem peculiar to Firoz Shah, that there were many slaves that he had acquired, all the prisoners of wars, and I told you that there were so many slaves that there was a different department to be set up for that. So essentially those slaves, they rebelled against Firoz Shah. Rebellion of slaves he created. And this is how Sultanate weakened. Also many provinces became independent because the Sultanate was weakening. And this name you can remember, Nasiruddin Muhammad. He was the last Tughlaq and he ruled for around 8 years, but there were many troubles. And finally in 1398, the last nail in the coffin of Tughlaq dynasty was Timur Lane's invasion in 1398. Huge blow to the Sultanate, not just this dynasty, in general about the Sultanate we'll see how it weakened. And before Timur, after defeating, plundering, taking away the wealth, Timur basically appointed Khizr Khan as his deputy in India. And then we will see Khizr Khan is the one who essentially establishes your Sayyid dynasty, which is essentially the scope of our next lecture. We are going to do Sayyids and Lodis in the next lesson, right? So this is about the end of Tughlaq dynasty and starting of Sayyids. So what all have we studied today? We have studied Tughlaq dynasty, founding, the important rulers, etc. We had studied Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, the founder. We had studied Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the experimenter. We have studied Firoz Shah Tughlaq and his administration in general, departments, etc. that he set up, and we had studied the starting or the founding of the Sayyid dynasty. Great. So this is about today's lesson, and that brings us to the end of today's lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and for more such videos that you would want for your UPSC preparation, I would request you to please log on to scholar.com, and that's all. Thank you so much.